Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. So we have just seen some excellent racing at the French Grand Prix, and I'm here with PozzA to talk about it. We were going to be covering the rule change and dive into our favourite liveries this week, because news came out prior to this weekend that MotoGP and Dorna have asked all of the MotoGP teams to run special liveries at a Grand Prix race this year. That's going to have to wait until next week, though, where we will do a bit of a deeper dive when Kelly's around. And because we saw some spectacular racing across all the Grand Prix classes this weekend, but prior to recording, the news came out that the Grand Prix of India, which saw racing last year at the Buddha International Circuit for the first time, may be replaced by Kazakhstan. So it does look like there's possibly some politics at play here, and also some financial issues with the promoter. And so my question to you is, do you think that the Indian Grand Prix will happen? And which race of the two, Kazakhstan or India, would you prefer to see?
Personally, I would hope that both of them can go ahead, sort of as planned. Obviously, Kazakhstan is planned, but I hope they can find a spot for that in the calendar. Ideally, without getting rid of another race, because I feel like last year proved that even though the whole build-up to India was a bit of a mess, it still ended up being a pretty solid race across all three classes. Yeah, it was a pretty good race last year, just as an event. And obviously, with India being a pretty big market currently, it would be nice to see it go ahead this year. But just in general, it wouldn't surprise me if Dorna do end up just taking India away to fit in Kazakhstan, just because they've had a couple years of build up now, and the race hasn't been able to go ahead. As for which I'd prefer out of the two, that bit more of a tough question, just because we haven't seen any on-track action at Kazakhstan at all yet. But yeah, I'd like to see both of them go ahead, if possible, this year. But it wouldn't surprise me if India does make way for Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to see them both. Of the two, I have to say I think I'd rather India, just because I did really enjoy the racing there last year, and it did look like the fans was a reasonable turnout considering how doubtful it seemed that it was going to go ahead initially. So I guess that factors into the fact that I just want it to go ahead. That, and obviously we've got quite a few Indian fans in the Discord server, and so seeing their disappointment when the fact it could possibly be cancelled was quite rough. So for their sake, I also do want it to go ahead. One thing with Kazakhstan that worries me is the hotels and facilities for the fans are 75 kilometers away from the track, and also it's a single two-lane road. And having just attended Le Mans and Jerez, traffic was an absolute nightmare getting out, and they were so much more prepared. So I think that would be a big issue at Kazakhstan as well. So let's get into talking about the racing, and we're going to start, as we always do, with Moto3. So the podium was Colin Via in P3, Danny Holgado in P2, and David Alonso in P1. A podium I think we're going to see quite a bit of this year. David Alonso did what he is so strong at doing, and waited until later in the race to get his elbows out and take that top spot. It seems to be his bit of speciality that he just, can save his tyres and save his energy for that last push. And I absolutely love the fact that we saw a lot of elbows out racing in this week's Moto3 race. My highlight, though, has got to be when Alonso started to make those moves, and with only a few laps to go, we saw that podium trio really battle it out, and we had three different leaders in three different corners, and that I was just in absolute awe about that. But what was your moment of the race?
I'd say my moment of the race was probably very similar. It was, I think, Holgado and Via elbowing each other going up through turn 2 and to turn 3 with a few laps to go. But as soon as Alonso sort of got back to 5th and just sat there, I was thinking, as soon as Alonso sort of dropped back to 5th, I was sort of thinking, After he tried to break away in Jerez and crashed out, he'd just sort of sit back there, run the pace of the riders in front, and sort of later on make his way through, which in the end is exactly what he ended up doing. Yeah, I think it was a pretty enjoyable race overall. Seemed a bit more like the classic Moto3 races we get with like large group battles. Obviously, David Munoz was up at the front, pulling his sort of aggressive moves as he normally does. He ended up taking out, I believe, Riccardo Rossi. Got a long lap, dropped back through the field, and ended up crashing out of the race. So, if he can just start showing a bit more of that maturity that he showed in Jerez, I think he could start to become a really big contender up at the front.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention Munoz because obviously I'm quite a fan of his, even if he is a bit overly ambitious 99.9% of the time. I was quite disappointed he crashed, but also you could see him go into sort of rage mode when he got his penalty. So I think it's probably a good thing that he didn't barge his way through the field with that red mist. And while we've been discussing Moto 3, Kelly has been able to jump on. So, Kelly, is there anything you want to say about Moto 3?
It was actually quite an entertaining race, and just to mention on Munoz and his double long arc penalty, it was watch I seen sort of his reactions, somewhat of it, because I was very short for time. It was definitely best he was not trying to barge through the field to make positions because my god, it would have been bad. And just to mention Scott Ogden as well, who up until obviously going down, he actually did have quite a good weekend. Not great, but like to say for him, it was actually a decent weekend. So that's very unfortunate for him. And for me, with Colin Vire actually taking the lead for a little bit and then being overtaken, I don't have a problem with that. It's good that he's getting consistent points and podiums instead of fighting for a win and then losing everything. So other than that, it was a pretty good weekend, I think.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned Scott too, because he was definitely having a good weekend and looked really good in free practice one, but then he definitely did seem to fall off a cliff. But moving on to Moto 2, our podium was Alonso Lopez, Ayagura, who had an excellent, excellent race because he started all the way down in P17 and then battled his way to the front. Thinking about it, Agura's performance was arguably one of the three contenders for the best ride of this race. One of the others has got to be Sergio Garcia, who won in absolutely dominant fashion and by over 3 seconds. It was start to finish leading. The third contender for the ride of the day, for me anyway, has got to be Aron Canet. He came into this weekend with a broken ankle, still put it on pole position. Then he got swallowed up in the opening laps before battling his way back to the front. He did start to lose the podium, then got punted out wide by Joe Roberts and lost the podium, so he was off. But I still think he had such an incredible race and was definitely deserving of the praise that I just put upon him. And PozzA, you go first. Which Moto2 rider impressed you most this week?
Personally, for me, it was Aigura, just the way he was able to recover from just a not good qualifying session, but also just Boscoscuro as a whole this year. I feel like it's one of the first times that they properly look like they're able to bring a challenge to Kalex. The first time it looks like someone other than a Kalex or a different bike other than a Kalex is actually the bike you want to be on and the bike that Kalex are trying to beat. Pretty sure it was also the first Moto2 podium without a Kalex on it since Valencia 2012. So, just to put that into perspective, at that time I was 5 years old and probably wasn't really following bikes that much as a whole. So this is, I'm going to say, the first Moto2 race I've ever watched where Kalex weren't on the podium, just to put that into a bit of perspective. But I did think it was really good to see Ayagura up there and fighting on the new bike, and I do hope that he can keep that up for the next few races because he is an exciting rider when he's on it.
You said probably weren't following Moto2 when you were 5 years old. Probably. That's quite impressive that you think that you still might have been. And jumping on that Boscascoro point, this was also MTI Helmet's very first 1-2, and I am going to pop the clip on screen of their celebration, the double stand-up wheelie, just because it's incredible.
I mean, I was definitely watching bikes to some capacity when I was around that age. I just don't think I was really following the lower classes that much.
That's incredible.
Just to talk about Moto2 myself, definitely to mention the MT Helmets team. If I was following Moto2 last year, I would not have paid attention to that team whatsoever. Like, being nice, I would have been. I wouldn't want to like word it like this, but I'd follow the teams who were top consistently. I wouldn't pay attention to teams like that. But then this year they came out of nowhere. Garcia's winning races. Aigura is getting like pretty consistent good results. Like, it's weird. I don't like. I wouldn't have thought this would happen, but I'm not saying I'm disappointed. I'm actually very happy over it. The race itself, from what I've seen, was okay. Aron Canet, I have to give him his applause. He genuinely did well, considering his injury, like very bad injury, dropping down to 11 and coming right back up. And that's really it. Just Barry Baltus and Zonta van der Gorberg crashing out, unfortunately, but that's all I have to say about it.
So, looking at the MotoGP class, we had a couple of excellent races. In fact, all of the races this weekend were pretty darn spectacular. The sprint podium saw Maverick Vinales in P3, Marc Marquez in P2, and Jorge Martin in P1. So Jorge Martin has now won 12 out of 24 of the sprints. It made me wonder, if his performance falls off a cliff, who do you think would be the next best at the sprints? Would a particular rider start picking it up, or do you just think it'd be a bunch of riders battling for the wins rather than Jorge Martin domination?
As much as I'd like to say it would be Marc or Pedro, it won't be. I'd say it'd be more a situation of every rider battling for a win. Like, it would be a different one, like almost a different one every week. I'd love to see Marc become like Jorge Martin of races, but he won't. Unfortunately, not yet. Anyway, he needs to get more used to the bike before he can do that. So I'd say it'd be a mix.
I'm gonna go the complete opposite way. I honestly could see Marc Marquez picking up the ball in that case. Marco Bezzecchi as well. He was looking pretty good in the sprint before he crashed with a few laps to go. But just the way that Marc's adapted to the Ducati so quickly, and he's already been at the sharp end of pretty much all of the sprints this year. It just still seems like Bagnaia is more of a full-length Grand Prix rider. So I do think if Martin were to not be there in the sprints whatsoever, I do feel like it'd be sort of Marc Marquez domination.
I just realised I didn't give my 2 cents. I think it'd be between Marquez and Acosta. I think they'd probably be the two that would pick it up. I think it'd probably vary between the two, and Bezzecchi, and actually I think Maverick Vinales had come into the equation quite a bit as well. But yeah, those are the 4 riders I'd have to think it was. The other thing we would like to note in the MotoGP Sprint is none of the Japanese bikes scored any points. And it seems to be quite a common theme that we're starting to see. And I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on it.
I mean, so far recently, it's more and more seeming like the only Japanese bike that's really up there is the Yamaha of Fabio Quartararo. Obviously, the Hondas are just nowhere near pretty much any of the other teams or other bikes at this point. Luca Marini, as such, still hasn't scored points at all. Pretty sure he's finished last in every race. He finished last in the sprint and the main race. But yeah, it does still sort of seem like it's only Quartararo really up there. It'd be nice to see Alex Rins start sort of getting up there as well. He actually crashed out of the sprint race.
That Luca Marini comment hurt my feelings, Poz. Yeah, it felt aimed. Not happy with that.
He's still definitely...
Where's Joan Mir's mention?
Hey, Joan Mir's been the top Japanese rider at some point this season.
I know, but it felt aimed. It felt so aimed.
Was actively willing Marini to score points on this weekend. Thank you very much.
And it still didn't work. We cursed them again.
This is going to sound terrible, but I think he'll score points when only 15 riders finish, and then I think he'll score a single point.
Don't say that. Shut up. Don't. Stay silent.
I completely agree with
He will
that.
score points from his own accord. That's what I'm thinking. From his own accord, he will score points because I said he will.
Kelly curse. So, moving on to the main race, we had a podium of Pecco Bagnaia, Marc Marquez, and Jorge Martin, and what a battle we got for it, to be fair. Marc Marquez took P2 from Pecco Bagnaia on the last lap, and my first question is, do you guys think that Marc Marquez is entering his Aron Canet era with all of these P2s?
No. That's a very simple answer of no, I don't think so. He's moved from a bike that was like, how do you say it, slow, inconsistent, and very different, I'd like to say. So to be able to adapt this quickly to a bike that's like totally different, completely different manufacturer, I think the P2s were inevitable anyway. But I feel like once he actually slowly gets used to it, he'll be able to build it up and slowly get wins. It's just a matter of time, really. It takes time to get used to these things. You can't expect someone to perform and get wins straight away. So I like to think of it as he's playing the long game. He's getting used to the bike, figuring out what works best, just getting consistent podiums, not risking anything, and then he'll go for wins.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like if he can keep himself injury-free, which over the last few years has been a big thing, I feel like he's going to get at least one win this year. I feel like it's just sort of inevitable. Obviously, if he can stay fit and keep up progress he's making with learning how to ride the bike.
One other thing I'd like to discuss about it, the race that is Enea Bastianini pulled an aggressive overtake on Aleix Espargaro that led to Aleix needing to check out of it and ended up having to take the service road and lose a lot of places. Enea got penalised for taking a shortcut rather than the move itself. Later on in the race, in the last lap, Franco Morbidelli pulled a similar move. Morbidelli was quoted after as saying, "I attempted an overtake in the last corner that Aleix wasn't happy with, but I'm used to that by now." My question to you both is, with Aleix clearly not enjoying aggressive overtakes, do you both think it's time for him to step aside and retire? Possibly give that spot to another rider? And one thing that I heard a lot of people talking about was there was a part during the Riders Parade where Aleix Espargaro actually took his Aprilia hat off and put it on Jorge Martin, who is definitely one of the contenders for that spot. But do you guys think that it is Aleix's time to step aside?
My opinion might be a bit biased because since I came into this sport, I just wasn't a very big Aleix fan. I thought even like with his experience in the sport, he was like, I wouldn't say cocky, but he was very irritated at everything around him. He didn't enjoy anything. He was always annoyed at someone trying to fight someone. It's not a mentality I'd like to see in motorsport. So, and I never see, well, maybe one or two races were good, but like I've never seen consistent results that made me want to be like, oh yeah, this guy is pretty actually pretty good. I'd follow him. I just don't. I don't see what the big appeal about him is, and I feel like now that he's getting older and he's not enjoying aggressive overtaking, which is what motorsport is, I think it's just time for him to let go, step down, and bring another new rider up into the game.
Yeah, I feel like it really depends on what his long-term goal is. If his long-term goal is to try and win a title, I just don't think realistically that's going to happen. Just with the fact that KTM are generally pretty on par with them. There's obviously all the Ducatis, which something would have to go wrong for him to get ahead of them. And even now, it's looking like Maverick Vinales is sort of taking the lead at Aprilia. I also just don't feel like Espargaro has ever really been a rider. I don't want to say not capable of fighting for a title, but it seems like he sort of thrives on the whole taking a team from sort of low down and building them up. But honestly, I don't think his retirement will be too far away so far. It doesn't really seem like he's enjoying the racing side of things that much anymore. It seems like every second or third weekend he's finding something new to complain about. I would love to see Jorge Martin on the Aprilia, though. That is something I do really want to see.
I absolutely agree. Martin on Aprilia would be so interesting. And one thing that is, I suppose, a very real possibility of happening, at least in my mind, is that Ducati pass over Martin for that factory spot because they've got Marc Marquez, and Marc Marquez will bring in so much money on factory Ducati. And Martin could win this championship, still get passed over for the factory spot, and then run the number one plate on the Aprilia. And I just think that would be quite a good storyline because, like you, Poz, I don't think Aleix has that killer mentality to win a world championship. One person who I do think has that mentality is Pedro Acostas, and we saw him make his first rookie error, I suppose, of the season, and I did want to get your guys' take on how you think he will react to this rookie error that he's made.
I think he'll be okay. As long, I don't want to say it, but as long as he's not stuck in a Logan Sargent mindset where he consistently asks, have I done something wrong? What happened? Like, is it my fault? If he stays out of that mindset, acknowledges that it just didn't go his way, and goes, next race, I will get a podium. If you have that sort of mindset where you just believe in yourself, I feel like you will be gone off into the distance.
I still think you basically just compared Pedro Acosta to Logan Sargent, and the disrespect.
No, I
for
compared
Acosta.
mindset. I'm different there. I compared mindsets.
I'd just like to point out that in the last two Moto2 races at Le Mans, Pedro Acostas crashed out, and in the race after, he's won both of them, I'm pretty sure.
So
he'll be back. He'll definitely be back.
You're telling me that Pedro Acosta's winning his first MotoGP race in Barcelona?
I'm blaming you if that doesn't happen, Poz. It's your fault. You cursed him.
Actually,
Good to know.
Thinking about it, Pedro Acosta crashed out of his Moto3 races at Le Mans too, so maybe he just really doesn't like Le Mans.
Maybe they just don't get along. Everyone has a track they don't like.
I wish I'd known that before moving him into gold into my fantasy.
I have him consistently in my gold and my fantasy, so it doesn't matter.
I'm just happy I boosted Jorge Martin this weekend.
We didn't mention the Japanese Cup winner for the main race. This time it was Zarco in his home race in P12. Obviously it was looking like it'd be Quartararo, but he ended up crashing out after 16 laps. The only other two Japanese bikes in the points were Taka Nakagami in 14th and Alex Rins in 15th.
I have to admit, watching the world feed screens, the crying child they showed after Quartararo crashed out was, in a very strange way, quite humorous because it was a lull in the racing when we saw that.
You're laughing at dead children. You're laughing at sad children.
Hey, look, I've never claimed to be a good human being, but it was at a lull in the race.
That's insane.
Well, I've seen you do this exact same thing before. Don't start.
I have never done that. I don't know what you're talking about. That's never happened.
I'm happy to bring up the receipts if you want me to. I've
okay.
got screenshots.
No, that's fine. You don't have to do that.
Anyway, we are getting off topic now. So next week we're going to dive into the rules and regulation changes, as well as obviously our predictions, and also go over what liveries we would love to see again and our favourite ones in the past.